Hello learners of class 10, welcome to the wonderful world of English language classroom. Learners, we are in class 10, we read lot of texts, a variety of texts, short stories, travelogues, autobiographies and many such things. Some for detailed understanding in the main textbook, the first flight, and others in the supplementary reader, Footprints Without Feet. We have 10, 12 stories in supplementary reader for reading, extensive reading, reading for pleasure, to promote extensive reading. You will read on your own many stories, other things. So, today learners, we will have an autobiographical text by the great Nelson Mandela, who fought for liberty, rights of the people of South Africa from the clutches of white racist rule. You know, Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for more than 26 years. His entire life was devoted to peacemaking, reconciliation, negotiation, and thus he brought lot of values to people, and ultimately he won the Nobel Peace Prize. We know that this particular text in our textbook is the occasion at which Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as the first black president after 300 years of white rule and 50 years of cruel apartheid rule. Learners, what we are going to do with this particular Nelson Mandela's text, which is before you, Long Walk to Freedom. Mandela wrote this story, this life story in prison, and later it was released. He titled it as Long Walk to Freedom. Freedom is not given, you know, freedom is not free, someone said. Okay. Learners, before we move on to understand the text, let me play you the video of the inaugural speech of Nelson Mandela.
Your Majesties, Your Royal Highnesses, distinguished guests, comrades and friends, today all us do, by our presence here and by our celebrations in other parts of our country and the world, confer glory and hope to newborn liberty. Out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long, must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud. Our daily deeds as ordinary South Africans must produce an actual South African reality that will reinforce humanity's belief in justice, strengthen its confidence in the nobility of the human soul, and sustain all our hopes for a glorious life for all. All this we owe both to ourselves and to the peoples of the world who are so well represented here today. To my compatriots, I have no hesitation in saying that each one of us is as intimately attached to the soil of this beautiful country as are the famous jacaranda trees of Pretoria and the mimosa trees of the bushveld.
So, learners, before we move on to understand the text Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela, let us understand the objectives of the lesson. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to read the autobiographical text Long Walk to Freedom with understanding and identify the main ideas, characters, sequence of ideas and events, and you will relate them with your personal experiences. The second objective, you will be able to respond to a variety of questions on familiar and unfamiliar texts verbally and in writing. Then you also will understand and use appropriate words to deduce meaning from clues in context while reading a variety of texts. That means, you will understand the vocabulary used in the text. Learners, having set the objectives, let me tell you something about what racism is in the European and American context. You know, people from Africa were needed in Europe to work in their farms as Europe was transforming into from agriculture economy to industrial economy, number one. Then even for their agricultural farms, they wanted lot of workers. So, what they did was, they took people from Africa. Almost 200 years the slave trade continued, and you may have studied in your history textbook and even in political science textbooks how racism, colonization spoiled African people. So, initially the black people, strong and vibrant people, were kidnapped into Europe and USA in order to make them work in the fields. Why they were taken? Europe did not have the required number of labor workforce. Also, once a white master, farmer, estate owner buys the black people to work, he need not pay anything. Only it is like today we sell cattle, cows, buffaloes, goats. So, like that it is once sold, they become the property of the owner. So, they were called slave owners, farm owners. So, they were bought, and these black people were not given any facility, minimum food, and they were made to work 15 hours or more than that in their farms, and they were beaten up, tortured. There are lots of movies, learners, you might watch it, the recent one, and you see that the torture the black person undergoes. Fine. This is what, then what happened in how black people suffered in USA. I will have to tell you this 200 years of black struggle, slavery continued, but President Abraham Lincoln brought out a law to liberate them in the year 1862. Imagine 19th century, September 22, 1862. Abraham Lincoln issued Emancipation Proclamation, and on 1st January 1863, he made it official, slaves within any states, that means in American states of United States of America, or designated part of a state, any part of United States of America in rebellion, shall then be henceforth forward forever free. He set them free. Imagine, learners, they were given freedom, but they were not given any other facility. So, they continue to live in apt poverty. Slowly, steadily, the black people were able to gain their own freedom and work in American government offices, go to education, because America was giving free education for all, even today it gives. But that was not the case. Learners, let me recall the recent event of George Floyd, who was arrested by a white policeman, beaten up, then ultimately he died in the police custody. So, the Black Lives Matter surged again, we know that. So, let me take you to 1950s, 60s as it appears on your screen. In 1955, Rosa Parks, a black woman, entered the bus and sat, and in those days, learners, in America in 60s, there were separate streets for black people and white people. When a white man enters a bus, if a black woman or man sitting, so he has to give the seat to the white people. But Rosa Parks, in December 1st, 1955, she was asked to vacate the seat for a white man. She refused. You just watch that video which comes now.
Let me have those front seats. Y'all better make it lighter on yourselves and let me have those seats. Are you gonna move?
No.
If you don't give me that seat, I'm gonna have you arrested.
You may do that. Jesus.
Learners, that was the video of Rosa Parks, who was considered the mother of civil rights movement of 1950s. And she grew into a well-known civil rights leader. She helped the black people, suppressed people of America, and ultimately which served some purpose. When she boycotted the bus taken to police custody, the entire black population and even white people supported her, and that was called Montgomery bus boycott movement. Now in buses and railway stations, in rails, black and white people can sit together and travel. That is the, and during the same period, Martin Luther King Jr., who was a pastor himself, trained in the church, and he became the icon, the symbol of black civil rights movement. All of us know that his great speech, "I have a dream." Martin Luther King Jr. went around the world, campaigned for civil liberty, people's rights, freedom, particularly in USA, the rights of the black people. Learners, you must have heard of the speech. So let's also listen to it again. And this speech shook the world, and he became ultimately the icon of civil rights movement. Unfortunately, the white racist killed him. He was assassinated in 1968, and he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So come on, let's listen to him. I have a dream.
I have a dream that one day this nation we have these kids to be self-sufficient. And all to be I have a dream that one day injustice, being transformed into the basis I call it in children.
But how it happened in South Africa? Let us understand historically. They call it apartheid. You can see the image here, which says beware of natives. Learners, we know that in some houses they put up a board saying that beware of dogs. So there are boards in South Africa which says that blacks only. These are the common practice in South Africa, the law created by the minority white rulers. So imagine in your own place, you cannot walk in some of the streets, and you cannot enter some of the buildings, but it is your country, your place. So, they call it apartheid. Apartheid means separateness. You separate people based on their color, race. This white majority who colonized South Africa, they bought the lands, they owned the lands. I do not know whether they bought it or not, because they occupied the land and they outstayed the native black people. Then in 1948, a party called National Party, which brought all the white factions together and declared South Africa as white racist state. Under that apartheid, non-white people, South Africans, the natives, lost all their civil rights. They have to live in separate areas, and Nelson Mandela was born during that period. Before that, Nelson Mandela says in autobiography that he was born in a kind of rich family, but he thought that he was a free young man, young child. But when he grew up, he knew that not only he says, not only I and my own people, my own community is not free. So, this is how apartheid was practiced. The Nelson Mandela, we will see the summary of the story, how he says it. Before we move on to understand what Nelson Mandela speaks, let us listen to a kind of a very short figurative film video on him. Come on, let us listen to it.
We explain how Nelson Mandela fought for equality and freedom. Today, Nelson Mandela is one of the best-known role models in the fight against oppression and racial segregation. In 1993, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his achievements. But what exactly did he do to fight for a more just and free world? On July 18, 1918, when Mandela was born, his father gave him the name Holy Shasha, which means something like troublemaker. A coincidence or a sign of things to come? Mandela grew up in a traditional Xhosa clan before going to an English-speaking boarding school. That was where he first got the name Nelson. At law school, he fought actively against the South African system of racial segregation known as apartheid, which was even written into the law. Mandela joined the ANC, a party that advocated for black Africans' rights. Although Mandela initially believed in peaceful protest, he changed his mind in favor of armed resistance. After the ANC was banned, Mandela's struggle went underground. But Mandela couldn't hide forever. In 1962, he was arrested and sentenced to life in prison as a terrorist. Although some Western politicians supported his imprisonment, more and more people around the world advocated for his release. In 1990, South Africa's new president, Frederick de Klerk, gave in and set the troublemaker free. 4 years later, Nelson Mandela ran for office in the country's first democratic election and was voted in as South Africa's very first black president. Considering himself the president of all South Africans, he united the country that had been divided along racial lines. One of the ways Mandela did this was through sports, such as rugby, which the black population rejected as a sport of apartheid. When South Africa hosted the Rugby World Cup and won the final, Mandela gave the team captain a congratulatory hug in front of millions of viewers, an enormous gesture of reconciliation. Whether through his efforts for the Soccer World Cup or his foundation against AIDS, even after leaving politics, Mandela remained dedicated to his country. To commemorate his tireless struggle, in 2009, an International Day of Remembrance was created in his name on July 18th. Even after his death, Mandela's dedication to peace and reconciliation continues to bear fruit in South Africa and worldwide.
Learners, you must be wondering why I am giving so much of information, historical and information about black lives, the civil rights movement. Learners, there is a necessity to understand how freedom is won and liberty is asserted. So, you know that how Mahatma Gandhi Sardar Patel, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, other leaders of India struggled, fought. They spent quite some time, 10 years, 12 years, many years in prison in order to liberate this country. So, we need to understand the freedom which we enjoy today, the liberty which we have today had not come very easily. So, we need to preserve it. We also have to respect our own fellow being in our classroom, on the street, at home, whichever office you go to, you negotiate with people. Understand, all men and women are created equal. This is what American Constitution also says. And all you know that French Revolution you must have studied, and Russian Revolution, ultimately Indian peaceful Indian struggle for independence. So, liberty and freedom are important. Imagine all of a sudden your freedom is snatched away, taken away. How do you feel? So, this is how this purpose of this lesson is to understand how an autobiography is written, also how Nelson Mandela tells us the importance of liberty and freedom, how to live. So, let us close this first part of the lesson as introduction, and I am going to tell you the learning outcomes, also give an assignment. Lesson 1, part 1. Go and Google or read something about Nelson Mandela and the struggles of South African people to gain independence. You know, it is not long ago, learners, 1991. You must you are born after 2000, you are millennium boys and girls, but let us go back not so many, 30 years ago only South Africa was freed of apartheid, and Nelson Mandela became the first black president of South Africa after 300 years. Then he brought so many things, and he said education is the weapon to fight against oppression and superstition. That is what Indian Constitution also says. And also to information learners, the South African Constitution was modelled on Indian Constitution, because we give equal right to everybody. Fine. So, I will close it here.
Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another and suffer the indignity of being the skunk of the world. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. Let freedom reign. God bless Africa. I thank you.